What is going on, guys? Noobles here. Haha. And today, guys, we are going to be starting our game dev journey. What's happening, guys? We're going to start our game dev journey with the first game that was ever developed, which is, I'm sure you can tell by the title, Pong. I chose Pong because it's a very simple game. It should be pretty easy to develop and will let me get a little bit of experience with Unity and all the tools it has to offer. My experience with game dev is very limited. I haven't actually fully developed a game yet, so this should be an interesting start. So what we're going to start off doing first is creating our cube game object, which is going to serve as our paddle. I'm just going to go ahead and size that up to the correct size. Pretty much I'm just eyeballing it at this point. You can always change it later. And I'm just going to look a little bit at what the Pong paddles look like and try and match that to the best of my abilities. Once we have our players situated wherever we want them, we are going to want to create our first script. I'm just going to go down and add a component to the game object and name our script movement controller. The purpose of the movement controller is going to be to control both of our players. We're not going to go with anything super complex here. I'm just going to use separate inputs on the keyboard in order to control both players. This will make things very simple and can be modified if you would like to add multiple controller inputs to the game. So first we're going to want to start off creating our variables for both of our players. Going to be public so that we'll be able to assign them to the game objects in Unity. And then we're going to want to create a second variable for our player's movement speed. So that's going to be a public float movement speed, and I'm just going to start off setting that to 2. This can always be modified later. And we're going to remove the start function because we will not need that right now. And then we'll go ahead and move on to the update. In our update function, we're going to want to do two things. The first thing is we are going to want to get the input from the keyboard using the input class that Unity provides. This class in our case will allow us to move our players vertically, but can be used in both a 2D or 3D environment to move your player however you'd like. I'm going to go ahead and copy that and create our movement input for both our player 1 and player 2 game objects, even though I haven't created the second player game object yet. Also, what we're going to do here is create our actual movement script, and to do that we're going to want to use player.transform.position, and we're going to add a new vector 3 to that using the parameters x, which is 0 in our case because we're not going to want any horizontal movement. And for our y parameter, we're going to want to pass our input times our movement speed times time delta time. And that will allow us to move in the direction that we would like. Time.delta time is the variable in the time class that Unity uses to tell how much time elapsed since the last frame that was executed. Now in Unity we're going to want to assign our inputs that we used in the movement script to the keys that we actually want to use to move both of our players. So to do that, you're going to want to go to Edit, Project Settings, and navigate to Input Manager. Now in this Input Manager we're going to have to create the inputs that we used in our function, which I do believe were P1 vertical and P2 vertical for both of our players. Now what I'm going to do here is assign it to where our first player, which is on the left side of our screen, has controls on the left side of the keyboard, which means they will be using the W and S keys. Second, what we're going to want to do is set our second player's input to negative button down and positive button up. And once we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and close that out and give it a little test run to see that the player 1 movement script is working just as we expected. I'm going to go ahead and duplicate the player 1 game object so that we can use it for our second player game object. I'm going to go ahead and rename the second player game object to player 2 just so it's a little bit easier to tell which object we're working with. Now I'm going to go ahead and create a new game object and name it game controller. The purpose of me making this new game object is just so that I can assign the player movement script to the controller itself instead of having to have the script assigned to each player. That just makes it easier to manage all of the scripts associated with each player all in one location. Now I'm going to go ahead and assign each game object to our variables inside of our script and go ahead and mirror the player 2 onto the opposite side of the game board and test that out. As you can see, I'm able to move the second player independently, but not the first, which means I left the movement controller script on the second player. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that script and retest, and as you can see, we are now able to move both players independently, which means we are done with the first part of this video, which is the player movement. If you guys enjoyed the video, please feel free to leave a like and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. You can follow me on the remaining journey that I have in game development. Thank you.